Mark this day, guys, because what you're about to hear has the far left shaking in absolute terror. Vice President J.D. Vance just dropped a bomb so big it sent shockwaves through Washington, through Hollywood, and straight into the heart of the radical Democrat machine. And folks, the meltdown is unreal. I mean, first, they celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk, exposing their bloodthirsty agenda for the whole world to see. Then Jimmy Kimmel thought he was going to be untouchable. He thought mocking Charlie Kirk's murder on live TV, only to watch his career go up in flames overnight. And now, J.D. Vance has just gone full scorched earth, calling out the violent networks, the dirty money, and the radicalization that fuels the left's chaos. So the Democrats are completely furious. The media is panicking. The elites are terrified because for the first time, someone is connecting the dots and they're doing it out loud and they're promising to bring them down. Now, let me tell you, once you hear what J.D. Vance said, you're going to understand why the far left fears him more than anyone else. So stick around, guys. Buckle up. Today, we're going to be exposing the lies, the hypocrisy, the complete meltdown that's got every liberal from Barack Obama to MSNBC screaming in desperation. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Appreciate you guys. J.D. Vance didn't just speak. He actually crushed their narrative, and now the panic is setting in. So watch this. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start at the very flashpoint. This is the moment that lit the firestorm. When Charlie Kirk was assassinated, the far left didn't mourn. They didn't pause to reflect. There was no moment of silence from them. They celebrated. They mocked. They excused. Social media was flooded with leftist activists and even professors justifying or even outright cheering his death. Imagine that. A father, a dad murdered in cold blood, likely right in front of his kids, right in front of his family, and the progressive mob laughs like it's a punchline. That was the trigger. That was the moment J.D. Vance said, enough is enough. And he didn't respond with polite words or press release. He scorched earth, okay? Vance looked right into the cameras and said that if your movement is encouraging violence, if you're calling for Americans to take up arms against their neighbors because you don't like their speech, you are not a protester. You are not an activist. You are part of a terrorist movement. That cut right through the lies. That's why the left is panicking. Because once you put the terrorist label where it belongs, the excuses crumble. And this is where President Trump stepped in to turn words into action. So just days ago, he formally announced that Antifa, the same violent radicals who burned our cities in 2020, the same people Democrats pretended didn't even exist, are now being designed and designated a domestic terrorist organization. Finally, America has leadership that will call out political violence for what it is. And J.D. Vance, he didn't flinch. He backed President Trump by 100%, declaring that these radical pipelines, these funding networks, and these agitators are not misguided activists. They're terrorists, period. And here's the part that has Democrats and the media shaking. J.D. Vance said directly that the funding sources will be investigated, exposed, and shut down. That's what got them terrified because they know once you follow the money, once you uncover who's been bankrolling the riots, the chaos, the Molotov cocktails, you find out it's not just fringe street punks. You start brushing up against the very elites who pretend to be respectable by day while fueling destruction by night. And right now in Washington and in every newsroom across America, the panic is setting in because President Trump and J.D. Vance, they're not just talking tough. They're moving to dismantle the left's most dangerous weapon, organized political violence. Now, imagine opening a bill for $800 because your Medicare plan didn't cover what you thought it did. That's the reality for way too many retirees. This is why I partner with Chapter, guys. They review your Medicare coverage so that you aren't caught off guard. And they do it for free for the Ron Yates community. One viewer left me a message and said, Chapter saved me from a bill I could have never paid on my own. That just made my day. So let me ask, are you ready for surprises? Or do you want to do what most people already are, which is avoiding them? Now, most people are calling the phone number on the bottom of your screen right there, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron. The telephone number is 909-563 8279. Now, let's dig deeper into what JD Vance's message was that sent the far left into full-blown panic: the funding and radicalization networks. You see, guys, JD Vance didn't just call these violent activist terrorists. He ripped the mask off and he asked one question the Democrats and their media allies never want to hear. Who's paying for all this? Who's pulling the strings behind this chaos? Because, folks, none of this is spontaneous. None of it is grassroots. When you got masked agitators showing up with pre-made shields, pallets of bricks dropped off in alleyways, and organized caravans bust into cities, that's not anger. That is logistics. That's money. That is coordination. And JD Vance said exactly what millions of Americans know in their gut. This violence has backers. It has donors. It has handlers. I mean, they probably have project managers coordinating all of these fake riot and fake protest events. He drew a line all the way back to 2020. You guys remember that? Over 20 Americans dead, entire neighborhoods burned, police officers ambushed, Molotov cocktails exploding in the streets, and yet the media calls it mostly peaceful. But what JD Vance reminded us is this: these so-called protests, they were funded, organized, and sustained by dark networks. And now, in 2025, with Trump back in the White House, these networks are finally under the microscope. JD Vance laid it out. If you're raising money to bankroll violence, if you're encouraging Americans to take up arms because you don't like somebody's speech, you're not a charity. You're not an activist. You are a terrorist organization. And the administration is going to go after you just like one. That's why this panic is setting in across every blue stronghold, because for years, the left has hidden behind phrases like civil rights and activism. Meanwhile, they're pumping cash into chaos. The cover's gone. And right on cue, who do we hear from? Barack Obama. Yeah, he stepped out with a statement accusing the Trump White House of exploiting Charlie Kirk's death to divide the country. Think about that for a second. First of all, Barack Obama, where has he even been? Why does he even have a say at anything? A conservative father is assassinated, radicals cheer it on, and Barack Obama's first move is to scold Trump and Vance for daring to crack down on the violence? Guys, this tells you everything you need to know about where their loyalties lie. But JD Vance, he didn't flinch. He delivered one of the most devastating counters that we've ever heard. He said, "We're not going after Democrats." Useless by implication. You're admitting Democrats are planning political violence. Let that sink in, because that line right there hit the left like a sledgehammer. If Democrats are panicking over a crackdown on terrorism, then maybe it's because the crackdown cuts a little too close to home. You see, this is why Obama's crowd is terrified, because what JD Vance just did was flip the burden back on them. If you're clean, you got nothing to worry about. But if you're scared, maybe it's because you know the investigations will expose who's really been bankrolling the riots, who's really steering the mobs, who's really responsible for years of bloodshed in America's streets. And make no mistake, this wasn't just rhetoric. JD Vance made it clear. The administration is already digging. The White House is already coordinating to choke off the radicalization pipelines. The money men, the so-called nonprofit organizers, the shadow networks, their days are numbered. And this is why the far left is absolutely terrified. Not because of what happened yesterday, but because they know what's coming tomorrow. They know that hammer is about to fall. So here's where JD Vance crushed another sacred cow on the left: accountability. And he made it crystal clear. Yes, the First Amendment protects a lot of ugly speech in America, but that doesn't mean that you get to just keep your cushy little job or your taxpayer-funded salary while celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk. JD Vance said professors, government employees, and anyone in the public on the public dime who cheered Charlie Kirk's death should face real consequences: job loss, funding cuts, the works. Now, let me tell you, that hit the far left right where it hurts. There's strongholds in academia, in taxpayer-funded institutions, in the media. Now, for years, they've hidden behind these free speech positions while poisoning students, dividing Americans, and cheering violence. For years. But JD Vance, he said, no more of that. We're not going to do that anymore. So if you want to celebrate the murder of a young father, civil society has every right to rise up and push back. This is why you see everyday Americans are standing up today and they're demanding that universities cut ties with these radical professors. This is why the left is terrified, because their cultural shield is finally cracking. Now, if you want proof that the tide is really turning, I mean, just look at Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel thought he was going to get away with mocking Charlie Kirk's assassination on live TV. That was a really stupid move. He thought it was just another late night joke. He thought. Well, it wasn't funny. Not to advertisers, not to affiliates, not to the American people. Within days, Nextdoor and Sinclair pulled the plug, replacing Jimmy Kimmel's slot with a remembrance of Charlie Kirk. The message was loud and clear. Mock a tragedy and pay the price. Then came President Trump, hammering the point home. He said Jimmy Kimmel wasn't just offensive. He was untalented, irrelevant, and had terrible ratings. Trump was very blunt, as he always is. Kimmel should have been fired a long time ago. And he was right, because here's the reality. The far left propped up Kimmel and his friends for years, even as their ratings continued to collapse, because they were just useful tools for anti-Trump propaganda. But the second advertisers smelled blood, the second the public backlash hit, Kimmel was tossed aside like garbage. That's why the media elites are scared, because Kimmel wasn't just the first domino. Tucker Carlson was canceled. Don Lemon was canceled. Now Jimmy Kimmel joins the graveyard of irrelevant talking heads. And every single left-wing host out there is now looking over their shoulder and wondering, am I next? All right, so right on schedule, the media meltdown was glorious. MSNBC, CNN, you name it, they are all screaming that Kimmel's firing was the end of free speech. They compared it to Xi Jinping, to Putin, even the Holocaust. Yes, you heard that right, guys. An Illinois Democrat governor, J.B. Pritzker, actually tried to compare the cancellation of an unfunny late-night host to one of history's darkest atrocities. That's not just desperate. That is disgusting. Now, here's the kicker. These are the same people who laughed, cheered, and clapped when Tucker Carlson got fired, when Roseanne got canceled, when conservatives lose their platforms, the left, they call it justice. But the second one of their own is tossed aside for mocking a murdered father, suddenly it's tyranny. Suddenly it's dictatorship. Well, folks, it's hypocrisy that's so thick you could cut it with a knife. And Americans are sick of this nonsense. This is why Vance's words hit like a thunderclap, because he's saying what we all see. The media doesn't care about free speech. They only care about their speech. And when the lies and the violence gets exposed, they hide behind words like democracy and authoritarianism. But the mask is slipping and the public is not buying it anymore. And speaking of the public, we need to talk about this collapse, because if you want proof that the left's megaphone is dying, just look at Kimmel's numbers. This guy went from hosting like millions of viewers on primetime network television to doing Instagram lives for only 600 people. That's not relevance. That is humiliation. That's embarrassing. And it's not just Jimmy Kimmel. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the Instagram followers that Jimmy Kimmel has are just bought. Like, those are fake followers. Ain't nobody really following him. Anyway, so the entire left-wing media ecosystem is crumbling. Viewers are tuning out. Advertisers are fleeing. Networks are cutting their losses. The truth is simple. These talking heads were never popular. They were protected. They were shielded. And now that protection is gone. They're being exposed as the irrelevant propagandists that they always were. And the best part is they know it. I mean, you can see the fear in their eyes, because if Jimmy Kimmel can fall this far, any one of them could be next. So now here's the part that should keep every Democrat strategist awake at night: the purity test problem. Because JD Vance didn't just crush their excuses. He exposed their greatest weakness. The left always turns on their own. No matter how many years of loyalty, no matter how much pandering, the mob always finds a reason to cancel the very people who bow down to it. Look around. South Park had to pull an episode for reasons. Disney, after years of woke crusading, is now facing boycotts from the very activists that they empowered. Online, leftists are they're calling to cancel anything and everything connected to Disney. Oh, it never ends. Why? Because in the world of the far left, there is no forgiveness. There is no grace. Bend the knee today, and tomorrow they'll come for you, in spite of the fact that you bent the knee. That's how they do. That is the ticking time bomb that JD Vance just called out, and the panic shows that they know it's true. Now, here's the final hammer. Why do they fear JD Vance more than anyone? Because unlike the average Republican who tiptoes around the media, JD Vance clearly is fearless. He names names. He calls violence terrorism. He puts professors, media elites, and radical networks on notice. He's not just fighting individuals. He's exposing the pipelines, the funding, the dirty tricks that keep the far left alive. And the Democrats know what happens if he and President Trump succeed. their entire structure collapses. The riots, the propaganda, the cancel culture, the fake comedy shows, the academic indoctrination, all of that comes crashing down. That's why they're terrified. That's why they're screaming dictatorship and censorship at the top of their lungs. They're watching the walls close in. So when you see the panic, the meltdowns, the hypocrisy, remember this. JD Vance crushed the far left because he pulled off their mask. He showed America exactly who these people are. And he promised that they'll be held accountable. And now the fear of the left is real. Because after this week, ladies and gentlemen, one truth is impossible to deny. The far left fears JD Vance more than anyone. And after what just happened, they should.